I loved being part of this discussion today about the Mangrove Breakthrough, and actually I was reflecting on how far we have come since this exact time last year when we were sitting around the table with a handful of philanthropies, a handful of financial institutions, a few governments had committed, the Mangrove Alliance for Climate and the Breakthrough hadn't yet come together. I mean, to leap forward 1 year today and see where we are, embodied on this panel, 29 governments signed on, a huge cohort of different types of financiers around the table, a financial roadmap in place giving suggestions about how we can come together, and a secretariat with the Mangrove Breakthrough to help bring all these pieces together. It's extraordinary. So I'm very happy to see the momentum going. And I think now in this lead up to COP16 and to COP30, the moment is right now to get down to business about finding and incubating these local projects and channeling demand responsive funding to them so that this agenda is real.
What is the main problems or pain points that you foresee in order to get there?
I think there's two pretty big first order pain points that we need to overcome. The first is that we talk about funding this movement, funding this mangrove restoration and conservation movement. We don't know who's out there. We actually don't yet have a great sense of what groups are doing what kinds of work in which geographies. So before we can even talk about scaling, we got to take care of this first order of business to run these calls for proposals and find out who are the community groups, who are the small businesses, who are the cooperatives out there doing this work. That's step one. Step two, another really big pain point is once we have that cohort of local actors, how the heck do we channel our funding to the ground where it needs to go? That has been a huge bottleneck so far that has prevented not only the mangroves movement, but a whole lot of restoration movements and a whole lot of ecosystems from taking root on the ground. Ultimately, the people who are doing the hard work day in and day out in these landscapes that we're discussing, they need to have the capital and the demand responsive capacity to do more of their work and to grow what they're doing. Those are the two priority pain points that we've got to tackle.
And then what do you see, or how do you see possible to scale those big fundings into those local communities, both trying to reach out, as you were just mentioning, but also for the local communities to accept that help funding or even change their habits, the way they do things, but also the monitoring in situ of what's going on?
Well, if we want these pieces to come together, a few things need to happen. I mean, funders need to be supporting projects that are rooted in the locally owned vision, objectives, priorities, worldview of the people who are managing these landscapes. I mean, our objective might be around climate mitigation or nature protection, but actually the people in these coastal communities, they need to feed their families, they need to find a source of nutritious food, and they're dealing with a series of really intense climate disasters. So adaptation is the name of the game for a lot of these people. And until we really embrace those multiple perspectives and bring together around the table local implementing groups with funders, with policymakers, we're not going to get too far. So we've got to start by doing that. Another piece when we talk about scaling is trying to figure out how we harness the power of so many really important locally led efforts. I mean, change is local, but that change is happening on a fragmented level. And so we got to start to have some aggregation so that bigger funding can flow to these groups. And there's two things that I think need to happen to enable that. The first, well, both of them are aggregation, really. The first type of aggregation is that we need to find the businesses or the community groups that are already bringing together these big networks of hundreds of households, community members in and around one shared project vision. Those are the people that we need to reach with funding because they can absorb it and then disperse it. And the second piece of aggregation is the institutions and the project developers. I mean, right now we're running a lot of these calls for proposals from the outside. Pretty quickly, that capacity needs to be rooted in institutions, organizations, in the landscapes that can do the work themselves to find, fund, and incubate these local projects. And I think if we build the capacity in those two areas, we're going to start to have a pipeline that's much more capable of absorbing big checks.
Talking about pipelines, how do you project what is going on right now into COP30 or even into COP29, which is happening in a couple of months or a couple of weeks, that has been taught like a transition COP in a way? So how do you foresee that?
First of all, there's the series of COPs, but I think the big picture that we're in, it's the decisive decade. We have about 5 years left until 2030. This is our moment that's going to make or break the development pathway that humanity's on. So the COPs are really important milestones. Even independently of that, the clock's ticking. We're talking about 5 years. So the name of the game needs to be implementation, ambition into action. And I think, again, a first order priority right now, a lot of the really great solutions that are happening and making a difference on the ground, they're happening here. Some of the policy and the funding discussions are happening here. They urgently need to come together so that we're unlocking the full power and potential of market forces, of finance, of supportive policy with the local vision and the person power that makes these agendas happen on the ground.